Good morning and a warm welcome to everyone who has joined the webinar. We're just getting set up here, and as usual, I see everyone joining in. We get started right away. Welcome to this webinar from Digital Swift Kanban, Enterprise Services Planning, and looking specifically at a number of things that one can do for replicating team-level success in the enterprise. And this is brought to you also by Lean Kanbaning with David Anderson. Agenda today for the webinar would be to get started with some introductions, as always. A quick word about Digite and Swift Kanban, and then I will hand over the presentation to David, who will talk about managing services delivery at scale with Kanban and ESP. We'll then have a short demo of Swift Kanban's capability and some of the latest things that we have done for supporting enterprise services delivery. For that, I will hand over the presentation to Dr. Ramesh Patil. And then at the end of that, we will open it up for Q&A, and hopefully we'll have a good session on interactive session with some of the questions that you might have for today's webinar. Just so you know, we will take questions via the Q&A box, which you should be able to see on the right side of your screens. And the webinar will be recorded, and the slides in the recording will be made available after the webinar is done. You will see a follow-up email. So, as I was just saying, today's speakers are David Anderson and Dr. Ramesh Patil. I'm your host. My name is Mahesh Singh, and I'm co-founder and senior vice president of product at Digite. Dr. Ramesh Patil is based in LA, and he's the CTO for Digite. And of course, our main speaker is David, who, again, I'm sure most of you already know, but just for those who don't, here's a quick introduction to David's overall experience and his pioneering work in Kanban. He's been a thought leader and a Kanban leader for more than since the inception of the Kanban method, I guess. He's been in the industry for more than 25 years, leading a variety of teams and organizations in software and high tech. His books are legendary in Kanban, and of course, the Kanban Blue Book, as it's called, Kanban Successful Evolutionary Change for a Technology Business, is considered the Bible for Kanban. And David, of course, is the chairman of Lean Kanban Inc., which provides a variety of consulting, training, and licenses, training material, and trainers in the field of Kanban. And of course, David is an advisor to Digite. We have been very honored to have him since the start of our Swift Kanban journey, and he, of course, helps us in overall product strategy, especially in the area of Lean Kanban. Before I hand over the mic to him, just a quick word about Digite. We have been around since 2002. We are headquartered in Cupertino, California, and we have presence around the world, especially with offices in India and in the US. We've got a range of products that cover Lean Kanban, Agile Application Lifecycle Management, and Project Portfolio Management. And at this point, we have nearly about 700,000 users across the globe using our products. And of course, Swift Kanban is our flagship Lean Kanban product. Just a quick view of how Swift Kanban is being used by some of our customers. So clearly, high-tech and IT and software teams are a big portion of our overall user base. And this is just a snapshot of our own development. We use Swift Kanban for our own product development. We also use it for our marketing, and we have a number of customers who use us in marketing and advertising and related areas, procurement, HR, legal, etc. So Kanban's use is everywhere in the organization. We also have some very interesting personal Kanban uses, and here is a template that we provide out of the box for party planning. If you're doing Thanksgiving and you want to plan it Sometimes these party planning exercises can get complex. You can use the Kanban board for doing that. And of course, Swift Kanban also is liked by and appreciated by most of our customers for the amount of analytics that we provide. A lot of it very deeply based in the principles of Kanban, and we have a very rich capability in terms of the analytics that you want to do for your teams to see how you're improving with Kanban. And just the last slide here to give you a quick sense of what kind of customers we have. As you can see, you'll probably recognize a number of these brands, global companies, and the companies are different industries using our products for what we call global delivery management of high-tech services and products. So with that, let me go ahead and welcome David. David, warm welcome to you. Let me just go ahead and make you presenter. Okay, there you go.
Okay, good morning or good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're listening in from. Mahesh, can you see everything now?
Yes, yes, David.
Very good. Okay, so this morning I thought I would talk about some of the basic infrastructure that's required to make enterprise services planning work. I have quite a lot of slides which I'm going to go through quickly without explaining all the detail of these Kanban boards. But first of all, for anyone new to this series of webinars, what is enterprise services planning, just very briefly? The idea that your business is an ecosystem of interdependent services, and if the work you do is largely invisible, you produce intangible goods. That means things which cannot be stored in a warehouse and don't have a physical presence. Then you're in the professional services business, and that pretty much includes all software and IT services and any creative or knowledge worker industries. And we've certainly seen Kanban adoption in places like market research companies, advertising agencies, web agencies, law firms. All of these would be professional services examples. And their businesses are ecosystems or a network of interdependent services, and often those dependencies are very complex. This is the problem we're trying to solve with enterprise services planning, how to manage these organizations much, much better than they have been to date. Strange, the pop-up on this one is back to front. It looked all right last night. The enterprise services planning, the concept that we do the right things at the right time, done the right way, and with appropriate risk exposure. That if you're running a business, you're in business to take risk, to take some risk but not too much, and the investors in your organization have some expectation of how much risk you should take. And if you're in the public sector, then the politicians and your taxpayers have an expectation of how much risk you should be taking. That we undertake enterprise in order to achieve improvements in our world, in our society, in our lives, and it involves taking some amount of risk. So we can't think about enterprise services planning without thinking about risk exposure. And the enterprise services planning, the detail involves scheduling, sequencing, selecting, commitment, anticipating and managing dependencies, risk management, and understanding what's essential in your business based on your strategy and what makes you fit for purpose, the concept of fitness for purpose in everything that you do. So many of you will have seen a diagram like this before. It's intended to represent a much larger network of enterprise services, And in this example at 3 levels, a customer-facing application service level, an internal-facing, perhaps platform services level, and then the lowest level in this picture is internally facing shared services. And to manage a complex network like this one, managers worry about 2 key things: being able to look downstream and anticipate and manage the dependencies that may occur. If we were to have a customer request something in the upper left of this diagram, we'd like to know how long it will take before we can deliver to the customer, and that will be affected by the number of dependencies. At the same time, if you're managing one of these internally facing services, you want to be able to look upstream and anticipate and manage the demand that's coming and know that you have capacity available. And the key is that if we could do both of these things, anticipating demand as well as anticipating dependencies, and knowing when to schedule and sequence and select things, knowing how to allocate capacity and knowing how to hedge risk, then we'll have a very well managed, complex 21st century professional services business. So that's the background on enterprise services planning. And the concept is that wherever you can see a service in your organization, you can improve that service, and we understand that we can improve service delivery in both the lead time, the predictability, the quality. We can improve all these things in service delivery using Kanban systems. Well, what we've observed over the last 7 or 8 years is that there are many different variations of Kanban systems, sometimes because of the scale of the individual, the team, the organization, sometimes because of the complicatedness of the workflow, the number of activities involved, the number of specialist skills required, and sometimes simply because of the nature of a Kanban system, the deferred commitment, the concept of a pull system, limiting work in progress. Not every organization is ready or prepared for the challenges and questions that adopting Kanban throws up. So organizational maturity affects Kanban system design. And now I'd like to walk you through a set of 13 or 14 designs very quickly, which demonstrate different scales and different levels of organizational maturity. Starting with a very basic personal Kanban system where we have a limit to the number of items we have in progress, and we have a next column upstream of that work that we are committed to doing, we're already thinking about it perhaps, and again we make a limit on that so that it doesn't become overwhelming, versus the backlog, which is a set of ideas, some of which we may never get to. You can scale personal Kanban by bringing it into the office, and once a few people within the same team or department are doing it, it becomes common for people to suggest there's value in aggregating those personal Kanban systems onto a single board so that everyone can see what everyone else is working on. It helps with overall team coordination, with empathy building, with collaboration. And it's a step of maturity and scale above personal Kanban. One final thought on this is that it's still very much focused on managing the people and managing their individual workload, and there isn't particularly any emphasis on whether the tickets on this board are customer valued or even relate directly to customer-facing work. Another variant at the team level, and by team we mean typically 3 to perhaps 12 people, It's unusual for it to be larger than 12. Team Kanban boards look like personal Kanban boards. It's really personal Kanban for a team. The requests on this board are usually coming from some external source, perhaps a customer, and it's possible that the team does provide a distinct identifiable service as opposed to just being one step in a more complicated, longer workflow for a larger service delivery. So two different possibilities with Team Kanban, but the key here is that we're limiting the work for the team, that we have a personal Kanban style of board, and we represent individuals using avatars or some kind of visual indicator which attaches to the tickets. So still at the single team level, but we've got a maturing focus. We're now managing the work and we're less focused on the workers. And there is the possibility that this team is providing an atomic service. They have customers and the tickets on this board represent customer-facing work. This next level board is something that I'm excited to say for the first time you'll be able to see in software in the demo that Ramesh will be giving later. I think we first saw this style of board at the portfolio level dating back to as early as 2009, and more recently we've seen it in the provision of services. That there's a case study on our website from an Austrian startup company called Tupelo, where they used a board like this one for their marketing and community development operations. And the key to it was that when they first adopted this, they really didn't fully understand their marketing or their community development processes. That it was still very emergent, very nascent in their organization. So they created a very simple board which had a very large, wide in-progress column, a next column showing things they would like to work on in the future, and a recently completed done column. And they moved the tickets from left to right as they perceived them to be more complete. In fact, at Tupelo in the early days, this was entirely qualitative. They would simply ask people on the morning phone call, how done do you think it is? And if they thought it was 75% complete, then they place it 3/4 of the way across the in-progress column. This style of emergent workflow board has really not been possible in software until now, and it's exciting to see it available because it enables proper portfolio Kanban boards, as well as the ability for nascent emergent services to adopt Kanban and gradually mature into more of a traditionally understood defined workflow. This is an example of a portfolio board. This actually dates from my Agile 2009 conference presentation, and this one has the wide column for projects in progress, and we're using things like the color of the ticket to represent a class of service or some other business risk, and the size of the ticket to represent the scale of the project or the budget associated with it. This next version introduces swim lanes or rows onto the board, separated out by the role that a project is playing in our portfolio, whether it's strategic, operational or tactical, and we might have some indication of the budget allocation which would affect the budget, the resources, the number of people allocated to a given project, and therefore the project size. So we'd expect the tactical projects to be a small sized tickets, and the larger strategic or operational projects to be large-sized tickets. In real life, I typically only see 3 sizes of ticket: small, medium, and large. And as far as I know, there isn't software that emulates the scale of the ticket. Perhaps there's a different way of visualizing the budget allocation or the number of people associated with a project. So color may indicate the cost of delay or another business risk. The size indicates the budget. And on a board like this, we can typically show 4 risk dimensions. We've got the schedule progress, the business contribution, the capacity and its capacity allocation, cost of delay or class of service, and the project size or budget. This is another variant which removes the swim lanes, but in this case we use the vertical space to indicate some other attribute. And what we have here is essentially a visualization of earned value, where the left to right positioning is the percentage of the scope that's complete for a project, and then the vertical axis is showing the percentage of budget or schedule that's been used. Therefore, projects which exist in the bottom right of the picture are all safe. They're essentially ahead of schedule. Those in the orange, we should pay attention because they're potentially slipping behind and getting into trouble, and those in the red area are already at risk and need some urgent management attention. Again, the size of the ticket may indicate the budget, and the color of ticket would indicate some other business risk, such as the cost of delay. This style of board is a per person WIP limit. We now have a more complex workflow. We don't actually have work in progress limits on the activities such as specify and dev, build, test, deploy. All of these examples are based on real examples that we've seen in the field, and this one was actually from a San Francisco based company called Posit Science in 2008. We have a few notable things here. We're moving beyond a single team to a service delivery workflow. So we have a larger organization, perhaps 20 or 30 people, an entire department, many different skills, some specializations. And the individuals have been feeling overwhelmed, and they effectively have a per person WIP limit, which is represented by the number of avatars they have available. In this case, it's 3 per person, and if we remove the pop-up there, you'll see that there's a bench where the avatars sit if they're not in use. The key to a board like this is that actually there is no limit on the work flowing through the system. Individuals are relieved from overburdening, but the rest of the system has these unbounded queues or buffers, and the result is that there isn't yet predictability in the service delivery. There isn't predictability of the lead time. The quality will tend to improve with a board like this because the individuals are more focused and relieved from being overburdened. So we're seeing greater scale here. We're seeing some higher level of maturity, and definitely customer facing. The work that's on this board is customer valued work. This next example is based on a case study or a blog post that appeared over the holiday season recently from a startup in New York. And the organization was moving from Scrum by decoupling the cadences, moving away from a strict time box and adopting separate cadences for the replenishment, the lead time, and the delivery from the system. And this was achieved by taking their existing Scrum board and instead of limiting it in time every 2 weeks, for example, they adopted a single WIP limit for the whole system. This is known as CONWIP, the constant work in progress. And then we have a separate replenishment cadence, the frequency of which should reflect the arrival rate of new information and both the transaction and coordination cost of holding the meeting. And then we have a separate cadence for the delivery. And we now decoupled the time box of a typical iterative agile method. And this frees the individuals from some considerable anxiety and generally results in improved quality. And with the CONWIP system and this relatively simple workflow, potentially an emergent workflow where it's shown as in progress, or perhaps it's a small enough team, it's really just team Kanban. But we would expect that we would improve the predictability, we would reduce the lead time, and together this system is providing better business agility than what preceded it. This is really an example of a proper Kanban system emerging. But given the typical scale here, a team level scale, we wouldn't really consider it a full Kanban. There isn't a full workflow. The last of these proto-Kanban examples is the aggregated team Kanban. For several years it was known as the infinite unqueue Kanban. It looks like a proper Kanban system. It feels like it should be, but actually it isn't. And about 3 years ago now, Mike Burrows and I together had the epiphany that what these actually were aggregated team Kanbans. In this example, we have a development team Kanban system, and we have a testing team Kanban, but they know that they work together, they collaborate on a single workflow, a single set of customer requests, and therefore created a single board. But we've decoupled that board by having an unbounded done queue between development and testing. And this means that at the team level, we're relieved of overburdening and we would expect quality to improve. But actually, at the system level, at the full workflow level, we don't have a proper process system, we don't have predictability. And in fact, at some stage I need to go through our training material and remove the word queue, because queue is really misleading. These done columns are buffers from which any item can be chosen in an arbitrary selection. They're therefore non-deterministic and effectively beauty contexts that testers get to pick whichever ticket from the development done column that they think is appropriate, and unless there is a very explicitly written class of service policy telling them which ticket they should pick and in which order. So the likelihood with a system like this is that if quality improves, lead time will shrink somewhat, but not as much as it could with a proper Kanban system, and we still lack real predictability. It's very non-deterministic. Moving from that to the next example, we actually now have a proper Kanban system. And in this example, the Kanban are the physical slots. So the work in progress limit is represented physically. And a board like this has advantages that it works very well for immature organizations, low discipline teams. It's awkward to break the WIP limit, as we see here with the I ticket, which is having to be attached to a section of the board which is otherwise blanked out. This next style of board uses physical tokens for the work in progress limit. So this may be a whiteboard. The physical tokens are magnets. We're attaching tickets to the board using the magnets, and the number of magnets represent work in progress limit. We can do clever things with this, such as using different colours to represent different states, and perhaps draw the board in a slightly different way. We could indicate done with a green magnet, we could indicate with a physical position. It doesn't always have to be a left-right movement. In some ways, moving tickets down to represent done is better than moving them from left to right. It avoids the desire to implement the infinite done style buffer board that we saw a few moments ago. It makes it easier to break the width limits, in this case for a legitimate override where we're blocking the A ticket in order to do the I ticket. It requires more discipline because it's easy to keep adding magnets and therefore not really have a width limit. So this board is actually an identical Kanban system to the previous one with the physical slots. And the next board is again the same Kanban system. Now we have a proper virtual Kanban system, and it's this style of board that we adopted in 2007, and that software vendors like Swift Kanban have widely copied. The key to a board like this is that the Kanban are virtual, and that means that it's very easy to break the width limit. It requires more discipline to actually implement a proper pull system and to respect the width limits. So this is by far the highest maturity requirement of any of the boards that I've shown you so far this morning. Once we have these virtual Kanban, we can start doing interesting things. In this case, we have the downstream delivery Kanban, similar to the one I've shown you, but I'm now representing what's happening upstream of that, and this has become known as the discovery Kanban, which for some reason is not popping up correctly. The key on this picture is that upstream of the commitment point, we use both minimum and maximum width limits. And we use the minimum limit as a replenishment signal. That if our ready for engineering column only had 2 tickets in it, that would be signaling requirement analysis that we need to produce more requirements which are ready for engineering. And this ensures that we always have choices available when we come to apply downstream delivery Kanban system. So minimum and maximum limits ensure sufficient options are always available. At any stage in the upstream, we might reject items. Other things we can do to virtual Kanban systems, we can add classes of service. We can use color to represent that, and we can actually create capacity allocations across those. So effectively a 2-dimensional Kanban system. We now have Kanban for the workflow of analysis, development, build, ready, test. And we also have Kanban that indicate different classes of service, different risks. We have capacity for only 4 of the orange tickets, 10 of the yellows, and 6 of the purples. And we're allowing 1 white ticket, which is permitted to exceed our width limit. So our width limit of 20 can be exceeded to 21 if we have a white ticket. And you'll notice in the development column, we have 5 tickets there. The white one is exceeding the limit of 4. We might be hedging the rest of those white tickets rather than with the capacity allocation of the purple tickets. Then we might aggregate multiple services together where we introduce different work types on different lanes. We still have classes of service. They might have different meanings on each column. And we also have capacity allocation for the lanes. And again, this might represent some form of risk hedging strategy. Finally, with the task board, we're introducing a strategy for improving the liquidity of the system and improving the ability for tickets to flow smoothly and quickly. So we have an aggregated service here. There are 4 different services: change requests, product defects, maintenance, and usability improvements. And we have some dedicated teams. They're 2-person teams from David, Peter, Rhonda, Stephen and Brian, and Joanna Shock. And what we're modeling here is that one of them is the team lead, and is the person responsible and accountable for the service delivery. And the second one is some junior person who's in training or under supervision. And that junior person would typically be rotated through all 4 of the different services, the different work item type provisions. And after they've rotated through all 4, they've learned all the services that this department or organisation offers, and they're now multi-skilled. At that point, they could be promoted because we consider them to be generalists or T-shaped people, and we give them an avatar, and their avatar can be moved around from one swim lane to another, depending on demand. Where we've seen this pattern in real life, it's very typically between 40 and 60% of the available workers are either on dedicated teams or in flexible floating workers using avatars. In one example I can think of, a department of 30 people, they provided 8 services. That was 8 of 2, so that's 16 of the workers dedicated across 8 rows of the board. And then we had 14, the remaining 14, who had avatars and were floating workers who could be moved around as demand ebbs and flows from one type to another. So we use this style of board for improving labour pool flexibility. And clearly, this is a high maturity risk management quantitative strategy. So I've just walked you through 13 or 14 different Kanban boards, perhaps 4, actually maybe 15 in this latest presentation. And I'd like to take a look at how those different boards relate to different levels of organisational maturity. And I'm providing this shorthand mapping of what's somewhat similar to the capability maturity model integration or the earlier manufacturing maturity model. We have 5 levels here called emerging, defined, managed, quantitatively managed, and optimizing. And very simple, emerging means we have no consistency of process or outcome. We're often relying on luck or heroic effort, and at the very depths of level 1, it's just complete chaos. Moving up to level 2, we have a defined workflow, defined process. We have consistency of process. We know what our process is. We know how to follow it. At the managed level, we have consistency of outcome. That means that if the customer expects something delivered within 30 days, it's nearly always delivered within the 30 days at the quality level they expect. So we have consistency of process, and that process produces consistent outcomes. That's the difference between level 2 and level 3. At level 4, we're quantitatively managing our consistency of outcome, and this makes our economic performance predictable. We're introducing risk management strategies to improve our economic performance. And then at level 5, we are optimizing everything that we've achieved at that point. We're using model-driven improvement. We're sensing the external environment and making changes internally to respond. We have a Kaizen culture, a continuous improvement culture, and we're at the business level, we're focused on being continually fit for purpose. Another way of looking at this is at the bottom end of the scale, we're very fragile, we panic under stress, and at the highest level, we're anti-fragile. When we're stressed, we respond by improving. And between the two, we show resilience, that's the ability to bounce back after something bad happens, and robustness, which is the ability to simply deflect bad things from happening, that they don't affect us terribly badly. So if we look at the different Kanban boards and how we map onto this, what I'm showing here is the lowest level at which it can possibly work. So if you have a chaotic organization, personal Kanban is about as good as you get. Once you get a little more organized, aggregated personal Kanban will work. And as you come up through the depths of level 1 and your more emerging process or organization, team Kanban will work. You'll start to see emergent undefined workflow boards as we get larger scale collaboration, but perhaps still a very nascent or emergent business, emergent service delivery. Once we start to get a greater handle on the processes we're using and our market or the service we're delivering is stabilizing, we'll start to see more elaborate workflows, but with a per person WIP limit to help avoid overburdening. We might start to see the introduction of a convict system, the decoupling of cadences, no use of time boxes, the introduction of actual pull system and deferred commitment. Or we might see team Kanbans being aggregated together as we start to understand better how they operate, or we recognize that multiple teams in a workflow need to collaborate together better. Then we begin to see proper pull systems used between levels 2 and 3. And as we move up to the virtual Kanban system that we associate with software like Swift Kanban, we're between levels 3 and 4. And I think this really indicates why it's been such a struggle over the years. When I documented Kanban, we had effectively a level 4 organization. And the book, the blue book, the Kanban Successful Evolutionary Change for Your Technology Business book, reflects that. But most of the market wasn't level 4. So it's very understandable that we've seen this diversity of Kanban boards appearing, and it's really been very important for the software products like Swift Kanban to be able to support all of these. So with the introduction today of the emergent workflow ability to slide items from left to right, that fills a significant hole in the maturity ladder for Kanban adoption. And as we move up here through level 4 and 5, some of these higher level risk management, capacity allocation, use of classes of service, visualizing different business risks, they're all introduced as we approach this Kaizen culture, high maturity world. So very briefly, the benefits, low level proto-Kanban, the key benefit is relief from overburdening. And as we move up into levels 2 and 3 with actual Kanban systems, we get predictability, fast, smooth flow. Moving into level 4 and 5, we see risk management and risk hedging appearing as we improve the economic outcome of the service delivery and the business as a whole. So some conclusions. There are many varieties of Kanban implementation, and if you're trying to do enterprise services planning across a business unit, you can expect many different styles of Kanban. So you need Kanban software that supports all these different styles and supports the evolutionary improvement of the individual services. A service could be as small as a single executive who provides an approval and has a personal Kanban, to a significantly long workflow that involves the collaboration of multiple teams and perhaps 30, 40, 50 or more people. The enterprise environments are heterogeneous. So maturity of a business or the market or the service provision, your products, the teams, the departments, the product units, all of these are highly variable across even a single business unit. Our expectation is that we must be able to serve up Kanban system designs that match to each of these different services in this very heterogeneous environment. And I think this emergence of an understanding of Kanban system design patterns and how they map to organizational maturity is a significant step forward for Kanban coaching and helping people with adoption. And with that, thank you, and we'll hand over to Ramesh.
Thanks, David. Very interesting perspective on the different Kanban board side. In fact, one of the questions that I had, which you answered at the end, was as organizations go up the maturity model, the patterns of their boards will evolve and change as what you presented right at the end. And I was wondering what might be the best way to visualize or get some sort of a trend analysis on how the Kanban boards evolve as well, just purely from a tool perspective.
Well, we always encourage people to take photographs and keep a diary to record the narrative of their organization and to use that narrative in reflection opportunities, whether it's an annual retrospective or perhaps more often, but to be able to look back and look at the story and look at how things have changed and emerged. And it does beg the question whether that's a feature for the software tool, Mahesh, that every time there's a process change made, the tool probably knows it's capable of remembering that. So is there a feature that could be used in retrospectives to show the evolution of the board design over time, and perhaps when changes are made to encourage people to insert some narrative to describe why a change was being made, what prompted it, so that it can be recalled later.
Excellent.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely, that's a great idea. And we talked about doing that specifically for taking certain metrics like the control chart, for example, and to see how the control chart changes as the process changes. And that's something that is in our roadmap to do, and this would be another way to track how the team and the organization evolves. So
I know that you've implemented the playback feature for tickets. So it sounds like there's an interest in having a playback feature for board design changes.
Yes.
Exactly. So there are a couple of other questions that let me just quickly take up before I hand over to Ramesh. One is from Sudipta, and David, you might be able to see it on your screen as well. His comment is that most organizations have a higher perception of their maturity. So they would tend to use boards which might be for levels 3 to 5, while they might be themselves at a lower level. But once they struggle with those boards, they might find it difficult to scale down. So the question is, can we help organizations assess their level of maturity where they currently are? Maybe a draft set of questions whose answers will help us get there. Have you tried?
Yeah. So for the wider international audience, I think that question is it's based very much in the Indian cultural context. that indeed there are probably many Indian companies that believe their organizational maturity is higher than it really is. And I am working on some simple organizational maturity assessment mechanism. The idea of, can we ask a few questions, and based on how they answer, we can indicate some level of maturity. Simple questions like, what happened the last time something serious went wrong? Did people panic and revert back to an older way of doing things? Did they panic and run around like headless chickens as though it was chaos? Or did they sit down patiently, organize a conference call and talk through the problem and determine a root cause analysis and an action to take to recover? And just questions like that are ways of indicating level 1, level 2, level 4. So I'd like to have a spreadsheet tool that has a series of questions like that in it and can be available as a download, maybe just for Kanban coaches initially, that will help them with organizational assessment and making recommendations. And it's always very powerful when a tool makes a recommendation, because if the organization chooses to override the recommendation and it doesn't work out for them, the coach has the comeback of, well, we recommended something different. I do agree with Sudukta that when people adopt a Kanban board and Kanban system design which is above their maturity level, it tends not to work for them, and the reaction is to abandon Kanban as something that doesn't work for them, when actually they were too aggressive with the implementation in the first place.
Right. And we are seeing some of that in, as you said, in the large sophisticated organizations, and I've used the word sophisticated a little cautiously, but their initial assessment is that Kanban is too simplistic until they go out and try it, and then they realize that there is value in starting simple and then evolving as their understanding of Kanban improves, and as they start to see benefits of what even simple Kanban boards can provide to them. So the other question is from Ravi Tadvalkar. David, I'm sure you know him. His question is, what design have you seen work for the DevOps model? He's trying combined board with upstream and downstream Kanban board designs, and it seems to be working.
I don't think it's a reasonable question to ask out of context, that there's no single maturity level for an organization doing DevOps. There's no single scale. You can't make a statement like, this is a DevOps Kanban board. You would need to assess an organization individually, both in terms of the scale of what they're trying to do and their organizational maturity.
Got it. Makes sense.
I'm sorry it's not a very useful answer, but it's a truthful, accurate answer. But we can't generalize.
Makes sense. But the other question that we often hear some of our prospects ask us, especially I guess in the context of enterprise services planning, I guess, is that the question is, what size and scale of the organization? Is there some sort of minimum number of people or business revenue at which some of these concepts make sense? So typically, what has been your experience, David, with organizations sort of going about the Kanban board and Kanban sort of evolution in their own organization at a certain level, at a certain size of their organization? Are these very small teams doing it, or are the large organizations with very organized IT teams doing it?
Well, it's very clear that personal Kanban helps people. It helps individuals. They use it at home. They use it with their children. So there's clearly value in personal Kanban, and that's also true if people happen to use it in the office to help them get things done. At the other end of the scale, we know companies where they're doing sort of level 3, level 4 style Kanban adoption on product and service delivery with 2,000, 5,000, 15,000 people. Some of the implementations in China are simply staggering in terms of their size and sophistication at companies like CMB and Ping An, both financial sector companies, and businesses like Huawei, who have the ambition to spread enterprise services planning across 100,000 people. Certainly we have clients doing enterprise services planning with up to a couple of thousand people, and we'll have a case study of that from Odigio at our Enterprise Services Planning Executive Summit conference in London next Wednesday, and they will also be coming to San Diego for the Lean Kanban North America and the Enterprise Services Planning Exec Summit the week of the 16th of May.
All right. So with that, let me just quickly hand over the presentation to Ramesh. And Ramesh, I know we are running a little late, but I think you can take some time to give a quick overview of what some of the new things that we're doing in Swift Kanban for an enterprise service planning perspective.
Refresh this. Are people seeing my board?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm really pleased that we will be probably with next release introducing the concept of portfolio lane, which is what David was describing in his talk. If you look at the topmost lane, let me close the other lanes. What you're seeing here is these are the cards and how much progress has been made on them based on the progress of their children. Most of these are hierarchy cards. So if you look back here, 4 of these cards have been completed, children, and 1 child has not been completed. So let us take that 1 child and complete it. So when this child is completed, you will notice that the parent child moved to 100%, and we have a rule that says when you're done 100%, then you're done. Okay. Similarly, if I take say US 14 and make it done, you will notice the other card moving forward. One of the key features of this this portfolio lane is that the cards that the children card can be anywhere on any board in the enterprise, and in one view you can see how they're progressing, and this allows you to create a portfolio lane in your Kanban board as one of the lanes, where what you're going to do is track progress of other smart lanes within that same project or board, or you can set up another board with multiple progress lanes, which will track, which like an executive can track progress of different projects or progress of different a class of service projects and so on. So it adds, even though it's a single feature, it adds a fair amount of flexibility to the enterprise rollout of Kanban systems. And pretty soon after we get the customer feedback on this, we will introduce the other one where you yourself drag to determine the level of progress of a card in a similar visual pattern. So that was what I had to share on this. We are also working on the risk management aspect that David was describing, but we perhaps show the demo for it next time we get a chance to do it. It's a little too early. How much time do we have, Mahesh? I think it's 10 o'clock.
It is 10 o'clock, but you can take a few more minutes. That's not a problem.
Okay. So the other thing I wanted to show you is that we have been, working on a whole family of metrics that support metric-based management, or more importantly, using metrics to understand the continuity of your flow, to understand, when how to get to the root cause of your process challenges. So here is one of those charts which shows you for a particular part of your board, assuming you're using team Kanban, you may want to assess the capability of one team versus other team, which are different regions of the board. So I have taken here in our project the part that the engineering does between design and completing of their code for ready, to be ready completed. You'll notice that the average WIP of this is 15, which is roughly the size of our team. It goes a little bit up and down based on vacation or special other things, like infrastructure work they do. The input and output is reasonably balanced. Okay, if you look at this chart in out, which is the flow depth chart, you also, from the start date, the orange area tells you how your running balance is, which also looks reasonably good. There is a challenge here where we noticed that some of the cards have been abandoned for a variety of reasons, and surprisingly, as soon as I first implemented this chart, I looked at it, and immediately we were able to remedy some of those cards, because as soon as you notice something's been sitting there for a long time, it helps you take care of that. Now, just as David was suggesting, if I look at a different region, which includes deployment to the internal production server, you will again notice, like here, these are releases. There are a bunch of small releases and a number of big releases being done to the deployment. And what that does is make your WIP ranges significantly larger. Your flow is more choppy, and even more interestingly, if I had the time to show you the liquidity analysis, you will immediately see that the turbulence in some of these places is high. And again, being able to notice that the turbulence is high has led us to actually, spend a lot of energy trying to make internal release batch sizes small, and so on. So not that all of these metrics actually help you with fixing the problem, but often they make the problem so obvious that it incentivizes you to actually work on them. And that's all Ramesh, I have to suggest. Yeah.
Ramesh, do you have a couple of minutes to show us that turbulence stuff?
Actually, I'll have to switch. I do have turbulence stuff. Let me share my development environment.
Oh, I see. So it's not in this release that you're showing here.
No, I have the liquidity, but the second level turbulence data has not been released.
Oh, of course.
Okay, so let me just quickly.
So for those listening on the webinar, Ramesh is introducing a new metric which I learned from attending Nassim Taleb's class on real-world risk. from one of his colleagues
So,
who has been studying turbulence in financial markets, and we've been emulating that. So back to Ramesh.
okay, so if you look at it, this is the same data set we are seeing. Please ignore what's on the right-hand side because it's something I'm playing with. So first chart is liquidity, okay? And the histogram below it is showing you, liquidity on a, each bucket is 1 unit. Second
So
chart.
for those listening in, the reminder is that liquidity is the number of pooled transactions that happened in the Kanban system on a daily basis. So the number of tickets that were pulled each day, pulled anywhere on the board, is being shown as the liquidity metric.
I mean, precisely it is the number of cards that move into a work queue.
Excellent.
That's the pull. The second one is the first derivative of the pull, which is raw volatility. This is, in effect, you did 10 pulls yesterday and no pulls today, then the difference between the two is 10. That's the volatility. That is, and the histogram below is showing you the distribution of volatility, and you notice that volatility is generally centered around 0, and you want to keep the width of that as narrow as possible. Here we are seeing a couple of large points which, I mean, knowing the data, end up being heroics done in order for doing our UI release, new UI release. So there is a correlation between this. Now, the next chart is the volatility, which is the dt over dx square, right, David?
Yeah.
Yeah, I've forgotten the formulas. I took the formulas from David. And this is really taking the volatility and making it sort of one-sided. Okay.
Correct.
So
it's squaring the previous chart.
And making it absolute value. Okay. And the last chart is the turbulence, and this is the volatility of volatility, if you want to think about it that way.
That's correct. And when Taleb first published this, he called it the volatility of the volatility, or the vol.
Yeah.
And now his colleagues are referring to it as turbulence. And
right.
The background on this is that they've shown a very strong correlation between high turbulence levels and predicting major shifts in financial markets. So it's a leading indicator, perhaps a few days or a few weeks in advance. Right. And using some of Ramesh's older data, I was able to show that the turbulence predicted the departure of a development manager at
yes.
their Bangalore development center. So I'm curious to see what else this is telling us, Ramesh.
So, the first, there are 3 peaks that are above, the quartile whisker. So what you're seeing here is the, on the right-hand side is the, quartile box plot. So the dotted red line is the effectively equivalent to 3 sigma, non-parametric. And you notice that there are 3 areas which are exceeding it. The first one that went up a heck of a lot is our new UI release, which actually, and it precedes the release, which actually was a fairly traumatic process because of last minute, testing issues. The others are smaller, but they also coincide with major releases here. The one in the middle corresponds with personnel changes. So the peaks that touch or go above the 3 quartile do tend to correspond to certain events that cause fair amount of changes in the flow of the board, basically affects your process. Now, the fact is that these changes tend to appear a few days before the actual event. And also, I think, David, if we go to the next level, the Gratch plot or something like that, it actually may give us even better indicator for that. I haven't figured out how to do Gratch yet, so that's the plot.
Fine. So the story here is that we're working on new metrics which allow us to understand when significant changes are coming, perhaps a few days or a few weeks in advance, and also to understand how to sample, how to understand when the system is stable and how to sample data for other forms of forecasting, Monte Carlo simulation, reference class forecasting. And at the moment, this is experimental. In other words, we're putting the functionality in place, and then we want to look at the data sets and discover whether the data tells us anything useful. And so far, it looks quite hopeful, Ramesh. It does appear that these pictures are telling a story.
There is something to it.
So features to come in the future of the Enterprise Services Planning release of Swift Kanban.
Yeah, I mean, I think, David, the approach I'm taking is that we'll make many of these metrics available, and would love people to give feedback on how it pans out for them, because the only way to see whether a particular measure works or not is to actually field test it. And I think on an overall basis, Kanban implementations at the enterprise level, we definitely need to develop some KPIs for the upper management, because they're so used to looking at 3 or 4 key indicators and saying things are going fine. They're not managing it. They just want to understand. So these kinds of things, I think, are very valuable for us to take the whole metric business to the level of KPIs.
Yes, I agree. And for those looking at the screen right now, the raw volatility measure shows some spikes, but overall it looks very stable within the control limits that you're displaying.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the kind of thing that can be rolled up into a sensible metric for a senior executive, that things are running along stably and that we believe in our forecasts. So if you've produced a Monte Carlo simulation for a project and it's predicting a certain delivery date, then you continue to believe in that because what the volatility data you're seeing is within the normal limits.
Yeah.
So we wouldn't typically show the executive this volatility chart, but we might tell them we believe our project forecast because volatility is within normal limits.
So the other thing that lets you do is pick the reference data, because you want to avoid areas of high volatility. Because as soon as you introduce high volatility, firstly, there's a special reason why the volatility is high, and secondly, the higher the volatility in your raw data, the less precise or sorry, the cone of uncertainty is much wider, so your forecasts are not as good.
Absolutely. So just looking at this picture, the volatility shows a spike towards the left and then another smaller spike towards the right, but there's a large chunk of time in the middle there that you could sample data for forecasting. And Ramesh was alluding to the idea that we're looking at introducing a mathematical technique known as GARCH, which is an autoregression technique for detecting regimes of volatility or periods of time where volatility is within certain bounds. And if we can do that automatically, then we can select the reference class data for Monte Carlo simulations automatically, or we can at least make recommendations and make the simulation reliable to use for someone who is not mathematically skilled. I think that's really the outcome that we need to achieve with enterprise services planning tools, that someone without a deep understanding of mathematics is capable of using the tool correctly.
Mahesh, you can.
All right. Thanks, Ramesh, for giving everyone an insight into what's coming and what's in our R&D kitchen. I think the presentation really hopefully gave everybody an idea of what some of the things that we're doing to really provide an insight into Kanban systems that people will not realize just using the regular Kanban metrics. So we're running late, folks, so there are a couple of additional questions that came in later, but we will answer those offline. I just want to, I know that we are about 15 minutes over time, but I want to thank everyone who stayed to, my apologies for the phone call that I'm making here. My appreciation for everyone who stayed back to listen to the webinar. Really interesting talks from both David and Ramesh. We are coming out with a smaller release in time to coincide with the ESP Summit in London, and we're going to come out with some additional functionality that will support that Ramesh talked about around risk assessment and visualization that will be out in time for the ESP Summit in San Diego in late May. So we are very excited to work with David to build this functionality and to see some of our enterprise clients really benefit from using Kanban and getting real insight into how their teams are performing and how they can improve and go up the maturity curve. And we invite all of you who may not have seen some of these capabilities in Swift Kanban to connect with us and or send us questions that you might have. With that, I'd like to close the webinar for today. Thank you all very much for being here. We will send out follow-up emails with links to the slides and the recording of the webinar within 40 hours. And so those of you who joined in late and asked me for the link will be able to get it within that time. Thanks very much again. David, thank you very much for your time this morning. Ramesh, thank you. And we will see you all on our next webinar. Thanks again.